Preshwabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistaki. A reading this morning from chapter 18 of the first canto, 18th out of 19 chapters. This is about King Parikshit treating this sage poorly after he felt he had been treated poorly by the sage. And I believe we're on text 29, is that correct? Did not read this one yesterday. I think we read 28 yesterday.
Mother Shobharati, is that right?
Yes, Prabhu, it's going to be 20.
Text 29. Mother Shobharati.
29
Yeah,
and 30.
Text 29.
And 30.
Okay. All right. Adbhuta Purva Sahasa Chutribhyam Aditatmana Brahmanam Pratyabhutraman Matsaro Manyore Vacha Abhuta Purva Sahasa Chutribhyam Aditatmana Brahmanam Pratyabhutraman Matsaro Manyore Vacha Abhuta Purva Sahasa Chutribhyam Arditatmana Brahmanam Pratyabhutraman Matsaro Manyore Vacha. Please chant.
Text 30 in the
Matsaro Manyore Vacha. Abhuta Purva Sahasa Chutribhyam Aditatmanaha Brahmanam Pratyabhutraman Matsaro Manyore Vacha. Anyone else?
Abhuta Purva Sahasa
Abhuta Purva Sahasa Chutribhyam Aditatmanaha
Brahmanam Pratyabhutraman
Brahman Pratyabhutraman Matsaro Manyore Vacha. Abhuta Purva Sahasa Chutribhyam Aditatmanaha Brahman Pratyabhutraman Matsara Manyore Vacha. Synonyms, please. Synonyms. Abhuta, let's just read these together. Abhuta Purva, unprecedented. Sahasa, circumstantially. Chud, hunger. Tribhyam, as well as thirst. Ardita, being distressed. Atmana, of the self. Brahmanam, unto a Brahmana. Prati, against. Abhut, became. Brahman, O Brahmanas. Matsara, envious. Manu, angry, eva, thus, sha, and translation together, please. O Brahmins, the king's anger and so, yeah. Oh, okay, this is a different translation. But go ahead, let's read this. O Brahmins, the circumstances having distressed him with extreme hunger and thirst, the king directed toward the sage his anger and envy, which he had never before directed to a Brahmin. Is this apparently edited, updated translation? O Brahmanas, the king's anger and envy directed toward the Brahmin sage were unprecedented, being that circumstances had made him hungry and thirsty. Purport. For a king like Maharaj Parikshit to become angry and envious, especially at a sage and Brahmin, was undoubtedly unprecedented. The king knew well that the Brahmins, sages, children, women, and old men were always beyond the jurisdiction of punishment. Similarly, the king, even though he commits a great mistake, is never to be considered a wrongdoer. But in this case, Maharaj Parikshit became angry and envious at the sage due to his thirst and hunger by the will of the Lord. The king was right to punish his subject for coldly receiving him or neglecting him, but because the culprit was a sage and a Brahmin, it was unprecedented. As the Lord is never envious of anyone, so also the Lord's devotee is never envious of anyone. The only justification for Maharaj Parikshit's behavior is that it was ordained by the Lord. Again, the only justification for this behavior was that it was ordained by the Lord. Right, let's go ahead and read the next translation, short purport. While leaving, the king, being so insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage. Then he returned to his palace. Purport. The king thus treated the sage tit for tat, although he was never accustomed to such silly actions. By the will of the Lord, the king, while going away, found a dead snake in front of him. And he thought that the sage, who had coldly received him, might thus be coldly rewarded by being offered a garland of a dead snake. In the ordinary course of dealings, this was not very unnatural. But in the case of Maharaj Parikshit's dealing with a Brahmin and sage, this was certainly unprecedented. It so happened by the will of the Lord. In this pastime, the king is out on a hunting excursion, which kings, even devotee kings, could do, because they needed to keep their martial skills sharp to defend the kingdom. So in this case, on his excursion, he was hungry and thirsty, came to the hermitage of the sage, and the sage was deep in meditation. And so it seems a little bit loud here. Is that all right? All right. Anyway, he did not receive the customary Vedic welcome. Customary Vedic welcome is three things. What are those three things that you have to give to a guest? Offer water, place to sit, and sweet words. Yes. So in this case, the king received none of these, and he was upset. Therefore, he stormed out. But on the way out, he saw a dead snake. So I'll just show this sage. He thought the sage was pretending to meditate. All these things came through his mind, which really make no sense because of his otherwise outstanding character and good judgment. But somehow in this case, he felt this compulsion to treat the sage like this, and he felt the insult to his prestigious position. So anger makes fools out of us all. We read in this case that it is Krishna's pastime. So does that mean our anger is also Krishna's pastime? You know, if we do something wrong and we mistreat somebody, and we can say, oh, you know, it was just Krishna's will. Krishna was just acting through me. This is a great assumption. Generally, the process of anger is explained in chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita. Jyato Shayam Puntam, chapter 2. It begins with Jyato. What is Jaya? Jnana. Anyone know? This means meditation. Jyato. To meditate on the object of the senses. Jyato Vishayam Pumsam. When a person meditates on the Vishaya, the objects of the senses. Sanguteshu pajayate, then naturally one develops attachment for them. When we have something in mind, someone in mind, some idea in mind, we just obsess with it, we become attached to the idea. So this attachment is what keeps us bound up in the material world as the process continues. Contemplating the objects of the senses means that we are allowing our minds to run freely and not treating them with discretion. Thank you. The thoughts that come through our minds are like objects in a river. This river is flowing, this river of consciousness is flowing past our perception. We are conscious beings, and we are conscious, like we can become conscious of any part of our body. So similarly, our mind is also producing things that we can be consciously aware of. The long-standing conditioning that we go through is that we are the mind. And so when that thought comes, this is my desire, and we totally identify with it. But the transcendentalist means to learn to step back and see these desires are coming through the mind, and we do not have to act on them. So Vishaya, Dayato Vishayan Pumsam Sangha Teshu Upajayate. Sangha Sangjayate Kama. Once we develop attachment, then it increases from just the desire to, like, I gotta have it, to lust, kama. Oh, I have to do this, I must do this. I don't care what else I have to sacrifice, I must do this. This is kama. But when we become obsessed in that way, kama krodha vijayate, then the result is anger. Why? Because what we contemplate sensually never fulfills us, even if we get it. But most of the time, we don't get it. We get something we don't want, and then we become frustrated. So this anger after frustration is one of the coverings of the jiva in the material world. The soul is so wrapped up with this attachment and subsequent anger that there's nothing left in the bandwidth for higher intelligence. And so it goes on, Krishna explains. Krodha bhavati samoha. When we get angry, we become bewildered. And this apparently happens to Maharaj Parikshit, but as we discussed, he's really just going through the motions as directed by Krishna. But for the conditioned soul, we can see that anger makes us do and say really stupid things. But we do things in anger, and then we do them very hastily, and then we lament them in great leisure. So, Proto bhavati samoha. Samoha smriti vibhrama. Smriti means memory. So when we are frustrated with anger, then we forget all of the good training that we may have received in our lives. And we just blurt out or act out in ways that are very self-defeating. Then we have to come back later to try to repair. I'm sorry. Our intelligence, then any discretion is lost. Samaho smriti vibhrama buddhi nasha pranasyati. Then we're finished. Buddhi, our intelligence, is nasha, it's destroyed, and pranasyati, so are we. So it all starts with this inability to separate ourselves from our mind. And it ends up just sometimes out of passion, people commit murder and they spend the rest of their life in jail, for example, right? Or we hurt somebody who's very dear to us, we say something harsh, we break something or throw something or do something that just reflects very badly on our character for the rest of our lives. And so this kind of inability to control anger is one of the hallmarks of the life in the material world. So when we take the path of yoga, one of the first things that we're enjoined to do is to control anger. In the Nectar of Instruction, Rupa Goswami writes that Vacho Vega Manasa Krodha Vega. Vega means like an urge, like as in Las Vegas. Vacho vegam manasa krodha vegam, jiva vegam udara pasta vegam. So vacho means speech, manasa means mind, and krodha is anger. So one who can control the pushings of the mind, the speech, anger, tongue, belly, and genitals, udara pasta vegam. That person is qualified to make disciples all over the world. This is Rupa Goswami's injunction. So how do we control anger? How do we prevent anger? Of course, that's the best thing. Prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Now it's prevention. So preventing anger begins with controlling our minds and recognizing these sensual desires that are the root of the whole thing. But if somehow we fail to do that, or something just comes without any previous warning, some person or some situation, recognize that anger is going to only hurt us. That red flag when we feel our heart pounding or skin flushing or our hairs standing up, and all of these defensive mechanisms that are built in. The easiest way to refrain from making fools of ourselves through anger is to give ourselves time to process. So when somebody says something that upsets us, rather than gratify our senses by just blurting out a response, we say, what are some things we can say?
You're not open-ended questions.
Okay, yeah, we could ask them for more information, get them talking, right? Instead of giving our opinion about what jerks they are, right? So can you tell me more about what you just said?
Maybe you could say, how can I do to pacify you, or what can I do to, if they're angry at us, or
maybe help might be a better word.
yeah, help.
Yeah. Okay, yes?
Sometimes they don't know what kind of the story, and they just get angry, but they don't know the full picture.
Yes, this is usually the case, isn't it? This is why we get angry. You're jumping to this conclusion without having understood my position. So there's a strong desire to want to explain our position, but there may not be a strong desire to want to hear our position, right? So this can lead to conflict. Wait a minute, I want to tell you my point of view. No, I don't want to hear your point of view. You're not going to change my mind. So Trisha's point, first draw out more. This is an excellent strategy. There may even be something that we hear by drawing out more that changes our position. I mean, miracles do happen. I was thinking something even more a little visceral than that.
Perhaps just saying, maybe I can take some space.
Yeah.
Instead of leaving walking away.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I hear what you said. Let me think about that, and I'll get back to you later. There's nothing more immediate and expedient than just saying, okay, let me get back to you. I'm not reacting to what you said. I just need some time to process what you said.
Yeah, along the same lines, a lot of times, I was thinking what Max was saying. A good night's sleep, and like kind of sleep, put something to say, let me sleep on it.
Yeah, let me sleep on it, yes.
And you have a different perspective when you wake up the next day.
That's right. That it gives that time, that anger time to dissipate, isn't it? Anything but act on the anger. You know, it's just, it almost is always counterproductive. When we master the urge of anger, we may use anger in Krishna service. That's another matter. Sometimes it is important to make a point, to make it with some emphasis. But the difference between that sort of anger and typical anger is what? It's controlled. It's being applied therapeutically. Just like in medicine, many medications are poisonous, but they're administered in moderate doses to benefit the patient. So anger can occasionally be used. It, however, depends upon the receptivity of the person to your words, your position, what you have to teach. And if people are not interested in what we have to teach or what we have to offer, then just getting angry will not help the situation. In fact, it will make us look less qualified to give any sort of guidance. Once Srila Prabhupada was in India in a pandal, and there was a Gita symposium, and all the speakers were speaking on impersonalist views of the Gita. Hour after hour, they saved Srila Prabhupada and his Western disciples for last. And so all of the devotees had to sit through these long lectures in Hindi. They didn't know what was going on. But Srila Prabhupada knew, and he was just chanting and fingering his beads, trying to tolerate it. Finally, it was time for him to speak, but rather than speak, he just said, let's just chant. So the devotees started a kirtan, and all the members of the audience who'd been sitting bored were happy to now chant, and then they started dancing. They all stood up, and the devotees jumped off the stage and started going up and down the aisles, and everyone was chanting and having a great time, and it was a fantastic way to end the evening. So the organizers were very pleased. But Srila Prabhupada was not having any more of that. He said, if you want me to speak tomorrow, I'm speaking first. And otherwise, forget it. So they relented reluctantly. So the next night, the program began with Swami Bhaktivedanta and his Western disciples. So the organizers, they began with a kirtan, and the organizers wanted them again to jump in the audience and get everyone on their feet and run up and down the aisles like the night before. But what had been a spontaneous event was now kind of forced, and the devotees did not feel it and did not jump off the stage. So the organizers went up and started tugging at their clothes, even the ladies in their saris. Come on, as if they were paid dancers. And when Srila Prabhupada saw that, he was playing kartals. He was so furious that he started swinging his kartals like a pair of nunchucks. And like, stop, get away from them, threatening in front of thousands of people. So the organizers were quite astonished by this. And of course they relented, but later they were telling the devotees, your Swamiji got angry. And as if this was, such an unsadhu-like thing to do. But this again just shows this misunderstanding. Yes, anger has to be controlled, and to control it means you can use it. How could Arjuna fight on the battlefield without being angry? It's just not possible. How could you take some kind of position and pursue it without some fire? So this is an example of how Srila Prabhupada used anger appropriately, but was not overcome by anger. After this incident, he just sat down and calmly gave his class on Bhagavad Gita. So in this verse, another word is used, matsara. Now, matsara means enviousness. And it was applied to the king. King Parikshit was described as matsara, envious and angry. So those two things often go together. We get angry because we feel somebody is not respecting our position, and we are feeling like we need to kind of assert ourselves. Matsara is the one emotion that does not exist in the spiritual world. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya. These are the 6 coverings of the living being in the material world. Lust, anger, illusion, madness, Kama, Krodha, Moha, Mada. Anyway, Matsarya is the other, the 6th. That you do not find anywhere in Krishna Lila. the people are envious of Krishna, but devotees are never envious. In fact, the enviousness of Krishna, Jai Jagannath, this is what brings us in the material world in the first place. This enviousness of Krishna is not a gross enviousness, it's a very subtle thing. We're not in the spiritual world and having a great time and dancing with Krishna, and all of a sudden, oh, Krishna has been disrespecting me. There's nothing crass like that. It's much more subtle. You're seeing Krishna at the center of everyone's life and all the enjoyment. And just the thought flashes through our consciousness. What would it be like for me to be in the center of everything? Krishna's in the center. What would it be like? I wonder what it's like to be in the center of everything. That's all it takes, because Krishna's fulfilling every desire. And here we are in the material world, thinking ourselves the center of everything. Every one of us feels we're the center of everything, isn't it? And because of that self-centeredness, there's all kinds of friction, because we're not the center. And as a result of this friction, there is anger and there's enviousness and all of these negative emotions. It all comes from this simple foundational desire to be at the center of things. Isn't it? Everybody is thinking that I'm at the center. Especially men. Women have a more naturally inclusive view of the world, although that's the same conditioning applies. But men in particular have a strong desire to be distinguished and admired at a higher level. I see this sometimes in Alachua, the temple. During the Sunday feast kirtan, there's big dancing going on. So on the ladies' side, they make these beautiful formations and coordinated moves, and it's very elegant and artistic, and everybody's working together to create these vibrant patterns. The men's side, there's only two moves. One of them is the circle move. The circle move works well for the men because each man thinks, okay, I'm leading. And then the other move is the jumping contest, So this kind of shows how the male ego has a strong desire to project one's position at the center. Yet it affects us all. Every man, woman, every animal, we're all in this envious position, and it is what keeps us covered in the material world. So aside from enviousness, all these other emotions, lust, anger, illusion, craziness, all those things are found in spiritual life as well, but they're completely purified. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, for example, in his Sharanagati, describes his whole experience with Krishna consciousness, starting from very introspective humility. I have spent my life just chasing illusions, he writes. When I see other people happy, I become unhappy. And if I see other people unhappy, then I become happy. He gives himself such a very humble presentation. So at the end of his long journey through surrender, he, in different sections, describes himself or envisions himself as a madman running on the banks of the Ganges, shouting, "Gaur Nitai, Gaur Nitai," and rolling in the dust, and thinking everybody, and recognizing that everyone in the community will just think he's gone nuts. When will that day be mine? There's no more social apprehensions whatsoever or conditioning. Yes, I just be crazy with love of Krishna. And this is madness, anger. He also writes about how when he's revived his position as a gopi in the spiritual world, if somebody, he'll be in Radharani's party, but if he sees somebody from Chandravali's party, he won't even look at it. I will not see their face. All these emotions, in other words, do exist in their pure form, with the one exception of wanting to be the center of everything. That we must give up, like Christ gave up his body. So spiritual life means we have to give up these egoistic ideas and visions for our future and concepts of ourselves as being at the center. That's the beauty of the association of devotees, because to whatever extent we are Krishna conscious, to that extent Krishna is in the center of our one-to-one relationships, of our community relationships. And during the kirtan, that manifests in the most beautiful way. Everybody's chanting the same mantra. Everybody's sharing the ecstasy of expressing our devotion. And the whole world could come together with this kirtan, unlike anything else that might unite people. So the beauty of Krishna consciousness is this great mercy of the holy name given by Lord Chaitanya. Therefore, all the bad qualities that come with materialism are gradually dissipated just by this energetic chanting of the holy name. Any thoughts, any comments on this so far? Yes.
I was wondering if greed is present in the spiritual world and how that manifests.
Absolutely. And devotees are greedy to get Krishna's association. They are greedy to serve Krishna. Madhu Mangala is greedy for sweet balls. And there's always a sense of service connected with that greed. Right? Sometimes we see devotees are practically greedy for service. It's time to wash up after prasadam, and somebody says, "Let me take your plate," or let me get that for you, or let me do this for you, because we want that extra service. So that sort of greed is very prominent also in the spiritual world. Everybody's eager to serve without any sense of pride. Like, I'm doing so much service for Krishna, give me more. I want everyone to recognize. No, but just genuinely, this is so nice to be able to serve Krishna. I want more of this and more of this. Prabhupada describes the greed of the Vaishnava is to see so many people taking up Krishna consciousness, and so many temples and so many books distributed. This is the greed of the Vaishnava. It has nothing to do with selfishness, as greed ordinarily does. Yes, Mataji.
I was just wondering that what one should do when the kids don't behave and husband doesn't behave. Then how should we not be angry at that? Because I think behind that anger is little worry, especially about the kids.
Yes, we want to see our kids grow up well, be productive, and when they do things that aren't contributing to that, we naturally feel angry. Yeah, and children are empowered by God to make their parents angry. They know exactly how to do it, exactly where to hit. So in raising our children, and just remembering these experiences, the best advice I could offer is to not allow them to control us that way, and calmly explain that you have some choices here. If you take this choice, that we will have this consequence. And if you take this choice, you'll have this consequence. Now, what would you like to do? So the consequences being explained in a calm voice are more effective than in an angry voice. We've all seen mothers at the supermarket with their kids, right? The kids are running around, and the mothers are getting so angry and screaming and threatening. And you look at it, well, how do you feel? This person is just not doing this right. So we treat the children respectfully, actually, in a way in which they respond. This is your choice. Just want to make sure that whatever happens next is your choice, not my choice. You have these options. That sometimes can help. Husbands is another thing, but if the children get us angry, they have won. Right? So we have to not let them win. And this, it requires intelligence, it requires a lot of determination, but most of all, not responding angrily. That is always a lot. Then we know that they're ruling the roost.
We can just rely on Krishna and pray that.
No. If they make the wrong choice, then they get the consequences. But they just need to be explained calmly and not in anger. Because we get angry, then we feel, okay, well, I blew it, so I got to be nice, and we withdraw the consequences. So, if you continue this, you will lose your whatever, your privilege, your favorite toy, your favorite meal, your dessert, whatever. Just know this will be the consequence of us continuing this behavior. So if you do it, it's your choice. Trying to give them a sense of ownership of their actions.
So I like the analogy of the river. The sink come on the river, you have to just observe them, not act. And a lot of times in situations when we are in a situation where we want to respond to that impulsively, sleeping on it is a beautiful thing that our minds do. But sometimes that river can have a huge tree come down and it's lodged in the river and it stays there for weeks, months, years. And sometimes when that thought comes up of that situation or the trauma or whatever it is, we get angry. We can't move that item down the river. How do we approach that situation?
Right. This is again, the sense that we have to control what's going on in the river, but we can't. And so we get frustrated. But even trying to control it is a fool's errand. So yes, big things get lodged in there and stay there for months, and we have no choice but to tolerate them. Tom's to teach Shastra one tolerates without being disturbed. We can know in the long run that, first of all, we are not that river, and we are not that tree. And the more we try to do something about it, the worse it gets. So learning to live with unwanted emotions, unwanted situations, unwanted issues, that's a big part of spiritual advancement. The issues don't go away, we just no longer let them dominate our mind and our consciousness. These are tests from Krishna to see if we can keep our mind focused on the goal. And if we do that, then the tests are no longer necessary, and then they go away. So it's very much like an injury. It's an injury on the subtle body. And the injuries just take time to heal. We then have the choice to maintain our regular activities or allow this injury to dominate and be all we think about. Like older people. Older people, I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Of course, I would never do this as a token older person here. But old people tend to talk about their bodily ailments. You have noticed that perhaps? Well, there's two reasons for that. One is that you get very accustomed to living as a young person. You live pain-free, and you think, okay, well, that's just how life is. Everything works. And then as you age, certain faculties start diminishing, certain organs start malfunctioning, and certain pains begin emerging due to lack of cartilage, etc. You get worn out, and then you start to be in pain all the time. And then unless you have something better to talk about, then it's inevitable you'll talk about that tree in the river. Yeah. I was with my mother in her retirement home one time. She was walking in front of me with a friend. And I was a little bit back, but listening to their conversation, and they said, and the lady was saying to my mom, and on top of everything else, now my butt hurts. Yep. This is life when you're on the bodily platform. Srila Prabhupada traveled almost nonstop as an elderly man. I mean, from age 70 to 81. And he was often in pain or discomfort and ill, and he persevered. He just kept going, and he did not talk about his ailments much. So I always take that as an example, because he was enjoying something more pleasing than were the displeasures of his physical being. Okay. Anything else? Yes. Go ahead, Max.
I just thought it was so ironic, or Krishna range. I've heard that like when the spiritual master comes, there's a lot of purification that happens. Even like this morning, we were just kind of getting all the tech together and everything. And I just found it funny that this verse was aligned, because I had this vision in my mind. I kind of have this attachment to making everything very perfect. And so when we had some new things to move around, I was feeling that frustration and that sense of conflict. And I realized that energy is very strong. You said it's almost like an energy in the subtle body, and it feels like that, almost like a fire. And so it seemed like you were addressing it just then, like it's not that we won't feel these things, because sometimes the mind is like also upset that I'm upset. So it's like not that.
It's just very psychologically complex, but yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's not that we won't feel these things.
Correct. We learn to live with them. Yeah, if you break your arm, it's in a cast, and your actions are limited for a while you heal. Similarly, the subtle body gets injured, and then you're somewhat limited for a while it heals. But it's not us, and it doesn't help. There's nothing we can do to heal that wound except to keep pursuing our spiritual life. When we get absorbed in our spiritual life, then the effects of these subtle wounds tend to gradually dissipate. But it may take years to get a particular tree out of our river. Say if you're very angry with somebody, and you can't get over that anger, and it stays with you, and you die, then what's going to happen? You'll be right back with that person again, because you'll be thinking of that person. There's a beautiful story about the prostitute and the Brahmin. You know this story? This Brahmin lived next door to a prostitute, and he would see customers coming, and he would be so, oh, she's so fallen. Finally, he said, I'm going to put a rock between our properties every time she has a customer. So he put a rock and another rock, and over time, there was a fence that was built up between the two properties, and one rock per customer. So the Brahmin died thinking of that fence, and he was thinking of all the sins of the prostitute, so he took a hellish birth. And the prostitute also died looking at that fence, and she thought, oh, I'm so sinful. And she took an elevated birth. So being obsessed with anger or resentment towards somebody will cause us to be with them again. The last thing we want to do.
I have a realization that, like you're saying, what we focus on at the time, that we go to sort of on our deathbed and we're thinking, oh, like I should have done this in my life to be Krishna conscious, or I made this mistake in my life. Then we're not thinking of Krishna, we're thinking of us.
Yes.
Even though it is humility in a sense, but it's still like the goal of humility is to focus on Krishna.
Right. Yeah, we're still thinking ourselves to center. So, okay, if there's no more questions on that, I'd just like to take a couple. Are we over time now, or we have a couple more minutes? This is the auspicious appearance day of Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur. So I'd like to take just a moment and talk about him. Vrindavan Das Thakur is the famous author of the Chaitanya Bhagavat. His story begins with the early nocturnal kirtans of the first wave of the Sankirtan movement launched by Lord Chaitanya. He would hold these kirtans at night at the home of Srivas Pandit. So Srivas had three brothers, and one of them had a little daughter named Narayani. She was just 3 or 4 years old, and they were very selective about who could come to the kirtan, but she was allowed to come. So Lord Chaitanya was especially merciful to her. He would give her remnants of his food, and sometimes he would look at her and just say, "Chant Hare Krishna, Narayani, chant," and she would, "Krishna," and she would just faint in ecstasy. So this very special little girl grew up and was married. Was it Kormahati, the name of the village where she was married? And tragically, her husband died not long after they were married, but she was pregnant. So she found herself in this very compromised position. Therefore, she took shelter in a home of a very poor Brahmin and lived in this very simple room. She was the maidservant in the household of this Brahmin, Vasudev Datta, the great devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So growing up there, her son had this very saintly association. He was born about 4 years after Lord Chaitanya took sannyas. So about when Lord Chaitanya was roughly 28 years old. Her son, Vrindavan Das, got his education, and by the time he was 19 or 20, Lord Chaitanya was leaving this world. So he became a disciple of Nityananda Prabhu. And he was the last disciple of Nityananda Prabhu. So he although he did not have much connection with Lord Chaitanya directly, he was very intimate with these devotees of Lord Chaitanya. So he learned from them about all of his pastimes and their realizations. So that was how he compiled this biography of Chaitanya, he called it Chaitanya Mangala. But later, another devotee, Lochan Das Thakur, wrote a book of the same name, Chaitanya Mangala. So Vrindavan Das Thakur's book the title was changed to Chaitanya Bhagavat. One of the reasons it was named that way was because people considered his biography the best, and they considered him an incarnation of Vyasadeva, who wrote the Bhagavat. So they call this Chaitanya Bhagavat. This is the best of the biographies. Chaitanya Bhagavat begins with the glorification of Lord Nityananda, because it's always appropriate to begin with appreciating one's spiritual master. And then the general drift of the text, he elaborately describes many of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's childhood pastimes, particularly. Stealing food, the offerings from the Brahmin, his interactions with the young boys and girls of Navadvip, how he would tease the Brahmins and harass them as they were trying to say their Gayatri. He was very, very naughty. All his naughty pastimes are elaborately described. So later, Krishnadas Kaviraj repeatedly, as we know, said, I'm not going to repeat these instances. They're elaborately described by Vrindavan Das Thakur in his book, Chaitanya Bhagavat. So Vrindavan Das is glorified for this reason. He's considered also an incarnation of Kushumapita, a very, very nice cowherd boy. These were his two dual previous lives, Vyas and also this cowherd boy. His samadhi is one of the 64 in Vrindavan in the Vaishnava Samadhi area. And we glorify him for his great contribution. Anyone who reads the Chaitanya Bhagavat is guaranteed to develop love of Krishna, it is said. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati told his disciples to read it 108 times. It's written in very simple language and very descriptive and enjoyable terms. So that is a little about Vrindavan Das Thakur. And we will stop there. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.